Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and here we are, 2023 NBA Mock Draft version 1.0. You might be saying, well, I've seen some of your other mock drafts this year. That's because the order is finally set. So here we are with a fresh, brand new landscape. This is going to be a lottery mock draft where we look at all of the 14 teams in the NBA draft lottery and how their futures have been completely shifted and shaped because of the results of tonight's lottery. As you can tell, I'm posting this the night of the NBA draft lottery, which is partially why I'm only doing the lottery itself. Gives me some time to think about picks 15 through 30 based on tonight's results, and also just given the time constraint here of wanting to get this video out ASAP, I wanted to just do the lottery here. So smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, turn on the notification bell for more. Also, we have a Discord now as well. Links in the description for that if you want to join that. Really good NBA discussion in there, so you guys can talk with me and talk with some of the other viewers. Just open-ended discussions about NBA draft prospects, the NBA in general, and just if you want to talk basketball, I think it's a great opportunity. So let's jump into the first overall pick here, and it's the San Antonio Spurs, obviously the big-time winners of the NBA draft lottery. And I have been saying it all year long that my gut feeling was that San Antonio was going to be the team that Victor Wembanyama was going to play on. I ended up being 100% correct about that, as the Spurs earned the first overall pick this year through a variety of ways. Obviously not having a very great roster, but also trading DeJounte Murray at the right time, setting themselves up to be in this position to have a 14% chance at the first overall pick. Pretty crazy draft lottery, honestly, this year, and the Spurs are the big-time benefactors of it, because we see now Victor Wembanyama is the first overall selection for the San Antonio Spurs, and he's going to be a massive franchise changer. I talked about the Spurs quite a bit, how they were a team that needs the number one guy, a guy who can be their 25 to 30 point per game scorer at some point in his career. I think he's going to get there relatively quickly, and he just completely shapes the overall outlook of this team. You also think about the Jakob Poeltl trade. They have a pick from the Toronto Raptors coming in next year. They got off of Jakob Poeltl the exact right time to now find their new franchise center. Look back at the history. 1989, they win the draft lottery to get David Robinson. 1999, they get it, or they get it with Tim Duncan, excuse me. And then later on, you see the fact that they now have at this spot Victor Wembanyama in 2023 is just absolutely insane, and a monumental moment for the San Antonio Spurs franchise that goes from one elite dominant big man to another seemingly all the time, and they finally get their guy here now after a few years in kind of NBA purgatory, not knowing what to expect and where this team would be. I think Victor Wembanyama not only just changes the outlook of this team currently, but also makes them a team that could attract a free agent this offseason, and we'll probably look to make a big push even going into next year, where Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, Trey Jones will all be in easier roles, more applicable roles for their skill sets. And because of that, San Antonio is obviously the big winner of the night for me. Then we go into pick number 2, and that's the Charlotte Hornets here. Of course, another team that moved up in the draft lottery. They had the 4th best odds. They now find themselves picking 2nd overall. And this might be a big question spot for a lot of people. Do the Hornets trade out of this pick? They have LaMelo Ball. What do they look to do? Do they actually sit here and draft Scoot Henderson? And for me, the answer to that is yes. You draft Scoot Henderson because he's the best available prospect. The Hornets are not very talented. They're not a very good team. Yes, Miles Bridges probably comes back into the fold next year, which is going to be good for them. They need that. But at the end of the day, they still are pretty lackluster when it comes to overall talent on their roster. LaMelo Ball is also coming off of a very injury-prone season, and he's missed some time throughout his career for injury. So Scoot Henderson here at this spot just feels like the right pick to me still. I know that there's going to be questions about, oh, well, do the two guards coexist together, this, that, and the other thing. I don't really care. Like, my answer to that is probably yes anyway. You look at all the best teams in the league, they have multiple guys who can handle the ball, score for themselves out of isolation, handle it in a pick and roll. Scoot Henderson and LaMelo Ball, first of all, there's a big size discrepancy between the two. LaMelo Ball, if he ever starts to care about defense, could fit in pretty well next to Scoot Henderson because he's bigger, gives you a little bit more matchup versatility than most other guard combinations typically would. But nonetheless, here for Charlotte, I think just picking 2nd overall, it's about talent acquisition mode, and Scoot Henderson's the 2nd best talent in the draft, and he needs to be the 2nd overall pick in this year's draft in my eyes. And because of that, I think the Hornets, they sit here, they stick with the pick. They got lucky in the lottery, they move up. It's their opportunity to draft Scoot Henderson, and I think it's exactly what they need to do. Pick 3, the Portland Trailblazers, another big winner this lottery, just because the Blazers, I almost said lottery simulation because that's how much I've done lottery simulations this year. The Blazers picking 3rd now at this spot. You see them with a really grand opportunity to either add to a young core that features Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons, or to potentially trade the pick and add to an older core that has Jusuf Nurkic, Jeremy Grant, Damian Lillard. I'm a little bit less excited about that Jeremy Grant, Jusuf Nurkic pairing than I am about the future of Simons and Sharpe, which to me makes this a trade spot possibly. Not necessarily that I would look to do that, but I think the Blazers will at least weigh that. The prospect they would draft, though, if they are here, in my opinion, is Brandon Miller, a player who would fit really well with this roster. I think one of the big issues with the Blazers team building during Dame's tenure in Portland is they've always looked at big men, and they've looked at kind of combo guards to put next to Dame. They've never really found a high-end small forward who can put the ball on the deck and score, knock down perimeter shots consistently. You think about some of the wings that he's played with there in Portland, guys like Alan Crabb, Evan Turner, Al-Farouq Aminu come to mind. Carmelo Anthony, probably the most skilled player he's played with at the small forward position. And quite frankly, that version of Carmelo Anthony wasn't quite the same as, Denver Nuggets or New York Knicks version. So I think Brandon Miller would be a really nice pick for them here. But I also labeled this as a potential trade spot. And you saw that little Raptors logo fly in here to the graphic. The reason I look at the Raptors as a potential opportunity is they have a guy named Pascal Siakam who could probably enhance this roster quite a bit for Portland and help take this team to the next level when it comes to being able to actually score the basketball, giving them another veteran who is a proven winner not only in the regular season but has also had a really nice career in the postseason as well. Specifically, you think about the times in Toronto playing off of Kawhi Leonard, but he's found a lot of success in the postseason outside of that as well. And I think Pascal Siakam could be a really intriguing fit here. And if you're Toronto, you do get the 3rd overall pick. Now, if this was 2nd overall, it would make a lot more sense for Toronto to really be eager to move up. But nonetheless, I still think 3rd could be intriguing for them. If the Raptors were to move up, maybe Amen Thompson would be the guy they would circle as well for this pick. I think there's a good argument for that as well. That kind of fits Masai Ujiri's draft style and draft history, looking at athletic players who can handle the ball and get to the rim and score around the rack. That's usually what Masai Ujiri looks for. Brandon Miller's a little different than that, but nonetheless, I think either Portland or Toronto, 2 teams that could make sense here to select Brandon Miller 3rd overall. 4th overall, we have the Houston Rockets. Now at the spot, Rockets fans, I understand how sad and bummed out you guys are. With Ime Udoka, this was a really good offseason, a really good chance this offseason for this team to take massive strides forward, and not only massive strides forward, maybe to even have grown into a playoff team. At pick 4, that becomes a little bit more challenging to do based on what's still on the board for you. I considered a variety of options for this team, and I've been prepping for this video for weeks, thinking about what would this team pick at which spot, and I've been kind of doing some of these mini mocks and thinking, well, if this is here, what do they do and how do they go about building it, which is part of why, because I wanted to be prepped for this situation where Houston falls to 4, and now I need to find them a player that fits and a player that's going to be good long-term. And I had to land on Amen Thompson here. I strongly considered some other players. I strongly considered Cam Whitmore, Jarace Walker, and Taylor Hendricks. I couldn't sell myself on it. I think that Amen Thompson's ceiling is just so much significantly higher than those other players that Houston, who I know there's pressure on this team right now to win. I know there's pressure on this team to take a big step forward at some point, and that Tillman Fertitta was expecting a shorter rebuild than what it currently has been so far, and Rafael Stone's probably not completely safe from losing his job at this point, but you have to do the sound practice here. You have to draft a guy that you feel like could blossom into a star when you still have a top 4 pick. And Amen Thompson, to me, is clearly that player, somebody who can put the ball on the deck, get to the rim. He's highly athletic, really, really quick and electric, shifty with the ball in his hands. The Rockets need a point guard. I think Amen Thompson would be the best facilitator on the team on day 1 of his career. Now, he's going to be very turnover prone. This probably shuts the door to a potential James Harden signing. I just don't care. You have to do it. You guys know I've been high on James Harden returning to Houston. I just think 4th overall, now it's a completely different situation. It looks completely differently than what it possibly could have had they had pick 1, 2, or 3. It's okay, though. I still think Amen Thompson, at the end of the day, might be a top 2 or 3 player from this draft. Getting him 4th overall, it could be a massive home run. Now, could it end up blowing up in your face? Yes. I feel like that's the risk Rafael Stone needs to honestly take at this point to save his job long term. And I think Thompson could be a guy down the road that averages 27-7, maybe 24-7-7. And if the shooting ever comes around, he becomes an absolute superstar. But worst case scenario, he's like a really, really good player who's an aggressive downhill attacker and puts a lot of pressure on the rim with the ball in his hands, which at the worst case scenario is something Houston needs. And I think this opens up the game quite a bit for Jabari Smith. I think it opens up the game quite a bit for Jalen Green in ways that currently are not present on this roster. Then we go on to pick number 5, and this is the Detroit Pistons here. And the Pistons, just like Rockets fans, almost feel like this is worst case scenario. And in fact, for the Pistons, it was worst case scenario. The lowest they possibly could have picked in this year's draft based on their record was 5th overall. And of course, that's where we see them now selecting is 5th in this year's draft. And it is a huge bummer for this franchise. I was almost cheering for the Pistons to get Victor Wembanyama or at least have a shot at Brandon Miller. Seemingly both of those options are now off the table, barring a trade up. Now that is a possibility here as well. I think that's an underrated element to talk about. Remember, the Mavericks back in 2018 had the 3rd best odds going into the draft, fell down to 5th, ended up trading back up to 3 with the Atlanta Hawks and drafted Luka Doncic there. So you can never say never for Detroit. Now they're not going to be able to move up to 1 and probably not up to number 2, but could they move up to number 3 for a Brandon Miller, especially with the Blazers in a situation where they maybe were looking to pick up more assets? The Pistons maybe load them up with some picks and maybe a young player or 2 in there and maybe facilitate some type of 3-team trade. That could be a possibility, right? But nonetheless, Detroit here 5th overall. I landed on Jarace Walker, a guy who I really, really do like for Detroit. I think he fills a lot of the things that they're lacking. Another shot maker who can put the ball on the deck and score. But I think really the big thing for him, he's a versatile defensive player. I strongly considered Cam Whitmore here. I really did. I landed, though, on Jarace Walker because I think he's just a little bit further along in his development. I think he's a little bit of a safer pick. Didn't measure super great at the combine without shoes on. A little bit under 6'7", which is kind of a concern because I think a lot of people were assuming him to be around a little bit more 6'8"-ish. But with shoes on, he'll be right around that 6'8" mark. And I think really for Detroit, you're looking for versatile wing players who can score, who can dribble, who can pass, and can shoot. And I think Jarace Walker does all of that with still being a really, really good defensive player who I think is going to be able to guard 2 through 4 pretty quickly into his NBA career. I think this is a good long-term move for Detroit. It fits their current roster. Now, it doesn't have the flashy upside of some of the other players like a Brandon Miller or, Victor Wembanyama, obviously, even Scoot Henderson to a certain extent, even though that fit would have been a little different in Detroit. I still think Jarace Walker here is the obvious selection for them just because he's the player that I think complements the current existing pieces the best. Going on to pick 6, the Orlando Magic here obviously consider themselves big winners as well from the draft lottery, simply because the Chicago Bulls did not move up. So they do have 2 lottery picks. They're the only team currently that has 2 lottery picks in this year's draft. And with the first one, it's about talent. They're going to go get Cam Whitmore. A big thing about Orlando since trading Nikola Vucevic and kind of restarting this rebuild and figuring out how this team is going to build itself long term, the key thing for them has been finding wings who are big, physical, strong, who can dribble the basketball and can get to the rim and score. And I think that Cam Whitmore perfectly exemplifies that as well as a player who's going to be able to do a lot of those things. And I think Orlando's building this really intriguing combination of wing talent. Think about what Boston has in Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. You could argue Orlando's maybe on a pathway to having something similar to that with Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero. Now the rich get even richer here, adding another really dynamic downhill slasher in Cam Whitmore. I've been saying it for a long time. The heart of NBA basketball, even with how prevalent the three-point shot is, the heart of NBA basketball is being able to get the ball downhill and get to the paint. Paint touches win you games because you're able to kick it out and get open three-point shots after drawing in the defense. A team of 5 Kyle Korvers, even as great of a shooter as he was, doesn't win you anything. A team of a bunch of drivers who can hopefully at some point shoot afterward is what wins a lot in the NBA. And I think Orlando, they're positioning themselves here to take a high upside swing, a guy who could maybe grow into a superstar in Cam Whitmore. Now, I don't necessarily see superstardom in his future, but I do think he could be kind of a low-end all-star possibly. And Orlando, if you add one of those types of players next to Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, you feel really, really good. There's not a lot of teams in the league that are physically going to be capable of matching up with this wing trio that Orlando would have. And remember, they still have another pick later in this lottery to add some of that shooting that they badly, badly need. I think Orlando's in a very intriguing spot here, and they have a really good opportunity to take a big step forward going into next season and beyond. Pick 7, the Indiana Pacers here now. Pacers fans, a lot of you on the channel, really big time shout out to you guys. I know there was a lot of hopes. I kind of talked you guys all into the idea that Indiana was going to move up, so I feel bad that they didn't. But I just want to make sure you guys know pick 7 is still a great spot to be in this draft. In most drafts, this is like a heartbreaker. If you don't move up, you're kind of sitting here at 7. You're like, oh, this is a weird spot in the draft. The talent kind of dwindles. Not in this class. This class is loaded. There's probably 9 guys that I would say are top 5-ish level players. And because of that, Indiana's getting a really good player here and a guy I believe in big time in Taylor Hendricks, who, in fact, if you ask me right now, he's probably top 5 in my big board. And the reason why he falls to 7 is because there's a little bit less offensive talent to maybe work with in terms of raw skill set that he has. You know, he's not as comfortable attacking when it comes to off of a live dribble and being the go-to scorer, but that's not what Indiana needs him to be. You think about their current team constitution, who they have on their roster. You look at the fact that they have Tyrese Halliburton, who's one of the best, if not the best, drive and kick players in the league right now. You have Benedict Mathurin, who's one of the best rim pressure setters as a perimeter player in the league right now, as well as an elite drive and finish guy. Now, he doesn't kick the ball out at all. I think that's going to be an area of development for him. But I think outside of that, you just need perimeter talent, and you need guys who can defend, and you need guys who can protect the rim next to Miles Turner, who's also a really good rim protector and shot blocker. And I think that's why Taylor Hendricks is so exciting and intriguing to me as a player, not only for Indiana, but just for the NBA in general, because I think he's a perfect fit into what the league's looking for with these hybrid defensive-minded wings who can also shoot the basketball. And that's what Hendricks can do. He shot above 39% from 3 this year for UCF. He protects the rim like none other. If you turn on his highlight reel, you're going to be shocked by the amount of blocks that this guy gets, and not just like he rotated over as a weak side guy and actually just, you know, swatted the ball a little bit when it was a contested layup. No, this guy's blocking dunk attempts. He is not afraid of getting put on a poster, and most times he comes up winning those challenges. So it's been a very impressive freshman season for me to evaluate a player that every single time I go back and watch him, I get more and more impressed by. And I think Indiana is grabbing a really good player here, 7th overall. So there's no reason to be disappointed for not moving up. In fact, just not moving down is a big win here for Indiana, because Hendricks probably doesn't fall past 7 in this year's draft, in my honest evaluation as of right now. Pick 8, the Washington Wizards here. And Wizards fans, I can say, are at least relieved to have not moved down to number 9. That was a big thing that I've noticed from my Wizards fans who watch on the channel. They did not want to fall down one pick. And I'm happy to see them still in the top 8. This is a good spot for them. Just like Indiana, this is not a bad draft to have not moved up. Now, would you have loved to move up and get Victor or Scoot? 110%. Even Amen Thompson, I think, would have gone a long way for this Wizards team. But at 8, there's still a player I really, really like for them, and that's Anthony Black. He's just a really good, calming, steady force at the point guard spot, and that's what Washington has been in search of. You know, you think about Monte Morris, and it seems like they've tried everything the last few years for point guard. They tried Russell Westbrook. Obviously, John Wall was the point guard long-term before some of his injuries kind of piled up. Then they made the trade for Aaron Holiday as well to try to really stabilize the point guard position. That didn't work out. They've tried everything, and they just can't get it right at point guard. They really just cannot, and it's okay. It's okay that they haven't, because now this is the time to do it. Anthony Black, just good, solid, steady, 6'7". He's Josh Giddey, but better, is what I continue to say, and that's really high praise, because Josh Giddey's a fantastic player, a fantastic young player who I really, really like coming out of the NBL in his own draft. If you go back to watch some of my videos on him back in the day, Anthony Black, I'm even higher on, because I just think he's a better defensive prospect. Athletically, he's more gifted than Josh Giddey. Had a really nice vertical jump at the NBA Draft Combine as well, which was one of the things I was very interested in seeing, is how he tested physically, because I think the tape suggested he was a pretty solid athlete, although I didn't know if the measurements themselves would suggest that, but they in fact did. So I feel really good about him as a prospect. I think that Washington here gets a guy who gives them a little bit of a defensive-minded player who can get in passing lanes, can also disrupt driving lanes, be a solid help guy when you need him to be. And I think just point of attack-wise, he's going to do some of the dirty work that Bradley Beal's not willing to do. And really, for a team that I think needs more toughness, needs more go out and do it type of guys, they get one here in Anthony Black, a player who really fits what this team actually seriously needs at this point, assuming Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma both come back next year. Pick number 9, the Utah Jazz here now at this spot. For them, obviously a bummer that they didn't move up. I'm sure Jazz fans had a lot of hopes, but this rebuild for Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck, this is a long-term thing. So this is not a, oh no, we need to panic here because we didn't move up. There's going to be opportunities for Utah down the road to move up into drafts. Now, there's not going to be a Victor Wembanyama every year, which is part of why it's such a bummer this season. But at the end of the day, they're still in a really good spot to add some really solid talent in this year's draft. And for them, I landed on Ausar Thompson, which is actually a really intriguing pick and not something I've mocked all year long up to this point. But I kind of just landed on it in this draft. I think with Washington and Indiana's needs, Ausar kind of sliding here made a little bit more sense. And Utah gets a really big time high upside swing here at a kid who I think can be a really good defensive player. I think at 6'7", he's one of the best athletes in the draft. He's a vertically explosive player who's going to finish a ton of lobs. I don't know if Utah really has the point guard to feed him those lobs yet at this point, but I think that with kind of the pieces that they have already, Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler, I think they're going to be at their best adding more perimeter talent, more athleticism and dynamism around those guys. And Ausar Thompson might be one of the most dynamic players in this year's draft because, again, he's a freakish quick twitch athlete, not quite like his brother Amen, but still really, really impressive downhill. He's a phenomenal breakout passer, so I can already see it right now. Walker Kessler blocks a shot at the rim. The ball happens to fall to Ausar Thompson, and all of a sudden he's outletting the ball up the court, well past half court, and all of a sudden it's a layup for the Jazz. And, that's going to happen quite a bit, I think, honestly, when he's a rookie or sophomore. The Jazz are just going to find advantage opportunities to score, and I think Ausar Thompson right now is a big-time advantage player. I think he's going to score a lot in transition. I think he's going to score a lot in 4-on-3 situations. Utah doesn't really have the players right now that's going to generate a ton of those. The Luka Doncic's of the world. Utah's had a lot of rumors about a potential Luka Doncic addition, which I do think would go a long way in helping accelerate this rebuild, of course. But Ausar Thompson, just a really high upside, intriguing young player that I think could make a big world of difference in Utah down the road. 10th overall, the Dallas Mavericks here now. Excuse my graphic there. It says New York Knicks. This is actually the Dallas Mavericks pick, and this was a huge win for Dallas as well, sticking at this spot, being able to keep this selection. Big time importance for Dallas because the risk of losing it was pretty immense. It was about a 20% chance of potentially losing the draft pick had it fallen to 11 to the New York Knicks. Instead, they keep it here now at this spot, and they have an opportunity to trade it if they would like to on draft night. They could move the pick to a team that wants to move up, and that player that team would likely want to move up for is Nick Smith Jr. For the Mavericks here, it just, I talk a lot about how there's 9 players here who I could see as potential top 5 picks in a lot of drafts. The Mavericks find themselves at 10 in a class that I think the top 9 is really cemented, and it's a tough spot to be because they need young talent. Like a Taylor Hendricks would have been so fantastic for this team. A Jarace Walker as well could have been fantastic. Obviously Victor Wembanyama would have been insane in Dallas, but now with the reality that they're picking 10th overall, it's just hard for me to see the right prospect for them that can fit year one and help reach the goals of the franchise, which is winning right now, which is why they made the trade for Kyrie Irving, which is why they've set themselves up in the way that they did, albeit I think a failure. They're at a spot now where there's a lot of pressure on them. So this pick is definitely a trade spot. I think this is where the Raptors could again get involved in a potential trade spot. The Raptors could potentially line themselves up with 3 lottery picks in this year's draft if they were to, say, trade Siakam to Portland. Maybe OG Anunoby goes out to Dallas in, a trade where pick 10 is featured. The Raptors could have 3 picks in the top 13 realistically and could add a significant amount of talent in the likes of maybe Nick Smith Jr. and Brandon Miller. There's also, their own pick coming up. So this is a real trade spot for me. I'd be surprised if Dallas actually sticks in and makes a pick here, although it could be the right move for them if they find the right guy, the guy that fits for them. But at the same time, it's a little cloudy for me who they would potentially take here. So for that reason, I have this as a trade spot, probably with the Toronto Raptors again as a team that I like the most as a potential option. Then we go into pick 11 here, and 11 is the Orlando Magic. This pick comes from the Chicago Bulls in the Nikola Vucevic trade. And at this spot, Orlando, remember, we went earlier on and went with a really intriguing wing in Cam Whitmore. And I talked about how they have to come back later on then and find shooting because this team just did not shoot the ball very well. In fact, they ranked bottom 10 in both 3-point attempts and 3-point percentage for team ranks. And In fact, they were closer to 5 for both of those numbers than they were to 10. So they're not a good three-point shooting team. They really need guys who can knock down perimeter shots, and Gradey Dick is really the player that stood out to me here for the Orlando Magic as a great option for them. They needed to add a guy who can knock down the three-point shot, and he does it at an elite rate. He proved it again during the NBA Draft Combine, knocked down 64% of his shots during drills, which is a good sign. Obviously, they're open shots, so you'd expect them to shoot at a much higher clip than they did in college. But Gradey Dick's got a really long track record of being a good shooter. Back at Sunrise Christian in Kansas in high school, he did a fantastic job shooting the basketball. That was one of his main strengths coming into Kansas, and then he really showcased that as well. But outside of that, he's just a flat-out good player. He's about 6'6.5" without shoes on. He's going to play at around 6'7.5" with those actual basketball shoes on. Because of that, Orlando's not really sacrificing a lot of the length and size that they've liked to play with. They have the athletes around a guy like Gradey Dick to hide some of the defensive deficiencies, and now it's just about finding a movement shooter who can open up the floor, open up driving lanes for Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Cam Whitmore. If you want those three guys to play their most efficient basketball, it's about surrounding them with shooting and other perimeter talent, and I think Gradey Dick is the clear, obvious answer for that with who is still left on the board. Some people might point to Jordan Hawkins. I think Hawkins is solid. He's just more one-dimensional than Gradey Dick, and I don't think you need a one-dimensional player here if you're Orlando. You want a guy who can crash the offensive glass. You want a guy who can still put the ball on the deck and is just a little bit more talented and bigger than Jordan Hawkins. To me, there's really no reason to consider Hawkins over Gradey Dick. I think that Dick's just flat out the better player, and for Orlando, he's just clearly the better option as well. Then we go on to pick 12, and the Oklahoma City Thunder are here. And I just want to say, Thunder fans, you might be a little bummed that you're not getting Victor. The rest of the NBA took a huge breath of relief when they saw the Thunder were still picking 12th overall. Because if the Thunder would have moved up, it would have been an absolute nightmare for every single team involved. Because if they got Victor, this team would have been a huge dynasty that would have been unstoppable over the next 5 to 10 years. But instead here, they're going to go and do something that is completely different than all of my other mock drafts, and there's a lot of buzz around it, and I think it's something that could realistically and genuinely happen, and I'm not just doing this to do it. I firmly believe this is a real possibility. There's been some comments asking about this as an actual outcome. Leonard Miller from the G League Ignite program goes 12th overall here for the Oklahoma City Thunder. He had a fantastic end of season, including a 30-point outburst. He can really rebound the basketball. And if you look at some of the things Oklahoma City is deficient at, it's strong physical size that can rebound the ball. And I know that they're adding Chet Holmgren in, but there's a real opportunity here still at the power forward position, even if it's just off the bench in year one, to make an impact. And I think Leonard Miller's a player who, with his progression in the last 12 months, there's maybe not a player who's progressed more that quickly in this entire draft process. Leonard Miller's going to be a really good high-end player that could maybe make a big time impact for Oklahoma City pretty quickly into his career, especially if he continues to progress at the rate that he has been. He can rebound the ball. He played point guard in high school, so he's got some guard skills. Now, I wouldn't really trust him in that type of role, but if you're Oklahoma City, you're not going to ask him to do that. You have Shea, you have Giddey, you have Jalen Williams. You don't need Leonard Miller to play that way. It's just an added boost that he has a little bit of playmaking capabilities under his belt, that he's able to do some of those things like that. Because of that, I think they're in a really strong spot to add some just good talent to an already studded roster, and he fits what they need. He fits the rebounding, he fits the toughness, and he measured really, really well at the combine at 6'9.5" without shoes on. His standing reach was fantastic as well. I believe about 8'10.5". So very, very impressive numbers from Leonard Miller from the combine thus far, and something that definitely locks him in as a potential lottery pick even at this point, which is way different from what I was projecting for most of the year, and definitely significantly different from what I was projecting a year ago when he was a potential early entrant into the NBA draft last season. Pick 13, the Toronto Raptors here now at this spot, and I'm kind of going with good old reliable here for Toronto. This just feels right to me. Cason Wallace. I think there's going to be a big need here for Toronto to add into their backcourt. Both Gary Trent Jr., Fred VanVleet, on player options. Both of them could potentially leave in free agency. I think the Rockets could potentially explore Fred VanVleet or Gary Trent Jr. Obviously, now the addition of Amen Thompson complicates that a little bit after this mock draft, but you could also see a team like Orlando maybe sniff around one of those two guys. There's a lot of teams around the league that would be interested in those two players' services. especially with the years both of them just had individually. So Toronto, there's a little bit of flight risk there. So let's go get a combo guard who can do a little bit of everything for you when it comes to putting the ball on the deck. But really defensively is where he's going to make his money. He's a very, very good defensive player who's smart, understands the game, has the intangibles. Now he's a little bit smaller at about 6'3". Not exactly what you'd want in a guard. Obviously, if you're looking at the defensive side of the court, you'd want him to be like 6'5", 6'6", and give you some more versatility that way. But at the end of the day, Cason Wallace is just still a flat out good basketball player, and Toronto has a big need here. And remember, if they trade into this draft a couple of times, you might look at them adding a guy like, potentially Brandon Miller and then maybe a Nick Smith Jr. to kind of complement this pick. And you go into next year with that young trio of rookies plus Scotty Barnes. You're in a pretty good, intriguing spot, and maybe Jakob Poeltl's your center holding it down long term still. And then pick 14, the New Orleans Pelicans. They did not move up in the draft. Another sigh of relief from NBA executives around the league, because if the Pelicans would have moved up, that would have been another team that's loaded with talent with an opportunity to add even more. 14 still a pretty good opportunity for them. And I ended up going with Kobe Bufkin here out of Michigan. This is the highest he's gone in any of my mock drafts up to this point on the channel. And I think that there's a lot of steam behind him as a legitimate lottery candidate up to this point of the draft. I say it all the time. There's about 20 to 25 guys that I think could be legit lottery talent, legit lottery considerations in this year's draft. I think a good example of a player who I thought was a lottery level player in his own draft that didn't go in the lottery was Trey Murphy. And the Pelicans obviously did a good job picking him up 19th overall in that draft. Now I think Kobe Bufkin here, 14th overall, he's a player with a wider range. I think he could go anywhere from, say, 13, 14-ish to maybe mid-20s. As of right now, there's a lot of questions about where he could potentially go, but he's got pretty good size, pretty solid athleticism, averaged 0.7 blocks a game as well, so he's impactful defensively, more of a playmaker on that end than an actual stopper. But New Orleans doesn't need him to be a stopper. They've got a lot of wing players right now in Dyson Daniels. They've got guys like Herb Jones, obviously Trey Murphy. They've got a lot of impactful defensive players. Larry Nance is a big man. They need kind of more connectivity, more players who can make the right play at the right time, and I think Kobe Bufkin's one of the best examples of that in this year's draft, because he's just a timely passer. He's a really good touch passer who keeps the flow of the offense going. But by the way, he's a really good ball handler, knows how to get downhill and score. He splits double teams pretty well out of the pick and roll, and I think there's a lot of upside for him still. He's kind of an underexplored prospect on the channel. I haven't talked about him as much as I maybe should have, but he's definitely someone who's garnered a lot of buzz recently, and I think 14 feels right to him here in this mock draft. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. I had a lot of fun recording. Again, this has been my lottery edition of this mock draft that's coming out the night of the NBA draft lottery. Reminder, picks 15 through 30 will be posted later in the week. I'm really excited for those as well. Thank you again so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.